Hey guys, welcome back to the corner. So I'm doing a follow-up video on tanks, sentinels and damage sponges. Because anyone that knows me knows that I'm a total rules lawyer. I just love rule interpretations. Whenever anyone turns to me on my gaming table and says, "Hey Bard, can you look up this rule? Can you tell me what you think? Can you give us a for instance of how you would interpret this?" I'm usually the guy to do it. What I've noticed, or what actually some of my other viewers have noticed more accurately, I tend to work the rules quite a bit when I do my videos. And someone made a really excellent comment on the previous video about how they would like to see a more realistic interpretation, role-playing in the sense of being a character as opposed to role-playing the numbers. And it really got me thinking. So I very much appreciate that input. So this one's for you. So I'm really just paraphrasing here, but basically the comment I got was, can you explain what it is to be a character in one of these particular roles of either tank, sentinel or damage sponge, and how that affects you when you're the one being expected to stand in the front and take all the hits. And I thought it was a really, really interesting comment. So let's just kind of dive straight into this.
I'm feeling tired, my time is gone today. You threaten suicide, sometimes that's okay.
So before I can really explain the concept of what I'm talking about, I think it requires a little bit of context. The general problem that I have with D&D, and 5th edition particularly, is it's the way it's presented. It's not a very dark and gritty kind of game. You can easily make it that kind of way. That's purely down to the person running, and the competence of your DM. But the presentation of the book and the kind of artwork and the illustrations, I feel very much set a tone for what it is you're going to see inside in the material. And to me, it's very difficult to get into that kind of dark, moody, gritty frame of mind that this comment was alluding to. Another issue I also have is I play a lot of my D&D in a public environment. There's laughing, there's joking, there's other people talking, and there is, there's usually beer as well. So it's very difficult to feel any kind of fear of loss because there's so much joy and interaction going on around. And most of this really pertains to the fact that you kind of need to be in an environment where you can explore those feelings, and it usually needs to be a very personal environment. If any of you have actually watched my Call of Cthulhu video, and how you really need to have a very serious tone, I think that would help to give a little context too. But these little gripes aside, any DM worth his dice is going to listen to their players and try to incorporate the themes that they want. So we'll just kind of put the presentation of the book to one side, and we'll try and concentrate on what it is to be in fear of death.
I'm here standing hollow, falling away from me, falling away from me.
Part of the problem I think we have is this kind of online gaming where if you die, you just respawn, you carry on, you get back to the point where you left off, and you just continue with your adventure. And I think it really desensitizes us to that concept of loss, because there is no loss. Something that actually makes it harder to really identify with those feelings of loss, especially in a D&D environment, is clerical magic. You can resurrect someone who dies. So it's almost to a point of like, you fell over again, didn't you? All right, get back up. It's very, very, very hard to really feel that kind of loss. But then again, it's not inconceivable that your DM can simply say there is no resurrection, because if you put it like that, if you say, look, this is the house rule, we're not going to allow any kind of resurrection, then you are instantly going to feel a lot more protective of your character. So it's not just so much how do I feel? How do I present the feelings that my character is going to perceive? Or how do I present the feelings to my compatriots who in my party? But it's as much as a point of you need to work with your DM if you want that feeling, if you want that emotion, because that's the impression that I get is you want to feel alive. And in order to do that, you need the rush, the fear of death. And you're not going to get that if death has no meaning. So this fear of death is actually kind of important. This this personal fear of loss in you is going to be necessary in bringing that psychological aspect over to your character. So when your character is starting to feel the effects of being the one who's stuck in the front, I think that would really help. So what is it to be a tank? What is it to be the one, being hit all the time? And I think for the tank, if I'm reading this correctly, the biggest fear for the tank is actually that their armor won't protect them. So it's the fear of pain. Now, I'm no psychologist, okay, but I'm going to try and interpret this the best I can. So if you're a tank, as I've described it, a character who does all their party protection through deflection, then you're going to start getting desperate in the sense of you want your cleric to constantly be casting protection style spells over you as often as you can. As the concept of physical trauma becomes more and more prevalent to you, you want more and more protection. You start to get to the point where you think, I can't bear the thought of actually being in pain, because you're so used to having this iron impenetrable shell. Likewise, another aspect of not wanting to be hit could also come in the form of, pleading with your bard or wizard to set up battlefield controls so that you are literally not in harm's way. It's a kind of twisted irony that if you want to play it this way, if you want to play the game this way, you get to this absolute point where you can't actually be the one to stand there anymore. And it's almost like you're not useless, but it's like, what's the point of being a defender if you're not willing to go up and defend? So there is this idea that I can't bear the thought of being in pain, and thus that is the kind of psychological trauma, I think, for a character whose main party role is to not be hit. I mean, ultimately, people don't like pain. People don't like being in pain. People don't like getting hurt. They don't like getting cut. It's not so much always the pain of the cut or the being attacked or whatever, but it's the lingering sting, and there's both that psychological and physical sting that comes from taking a wound. On the flip side, however, when it comes to damage sponges, they actually have a very different role in the game than a tank does. As I've already described in the previous video, the tank is deflecting and the damage sponge is absorbing. So for the damage sponge, the psychological trauma isn't necessarily something that comes from being in harm's way, but it might be something that goes a little bit further back in the character's history. The trauma is something that's clearly happened. Maybe it's something that was psychological, and then that character then feels that they have to put forward themselves and subject themselves to physical pain in order to block out the mental pain. And I think this is something that is a very tricky area, and you might not want to play on it too much, because you don't want to upset the other people in your group. But that being said, however, if they're made of stone stuff, and they don't mind these concepts, and they don't mind you exploring these unusual facets of a character, then yeah, it's something that can really get very deep and very meaningful for you. It's something that you can actually notice quite a lot in maybe a barbarian class. you find that you can throw yourself into a lot of danger, that you just run in and you rage up and you're just soaking up hits. But if you're starting to kind of show the effect in a character-based way, then it won't be long before you've got a character who literally just charges in and starts wailing on people. The rules themselves actually do lend themselves very well to this concept. There is a rule for the barbarian called the reckless attack, whereby you are choosing to gain advantage on your attacks, but all attacks against you will have advantage. If you choose to go down this route, it can be very dangerous, and it might actually prompt the other players in your group to try to identify with you and why you're deliberately putting yourself into such vulnerable positions. Also, this concept of reckless attack, it's like a form of transference. Someone in this psychological state of mind, I mean, like I said, I'm no psychologist, but someone in this psychological mind, it seems to me that sometimes you need other people to feel the pain that you feel, and that's why these barbarians might choose to attack so recklessly as they do. If a damage sponge such as this has any kind of fear, it seems to me it's the fear of remembering.
It's spinning round and round. It's lost and can't be found.
So if a sentinel fears anything, it's the fear of failure. As a species, we perpetuate successful habits, and non-successful habits basically get left by the wayside. So we have this kind of consistent drive as a species to just do things and succeed and always be the best at something. It's part of our biology, but it's also part of our meritocratic society where we just want to be as good as we can. And I think this is something that gets reflected in the Sentinel role. You want to prevent as much damage to your party by stopping damage coming through or preventing monsters from getting to your party. I think it's a very easy concept that people can identify with, because not everyone has had trauma and not everyone has these fears, but people do consistently want to outpace the people around them. The most successful, survival of the fittest at the end of the day. And it's also no secret that people are willing to put themselves in harm's way for the people they care about. But the fear of failure, the fear of being overwhelmed, that concept that you can't actually do everything that you want to do, you can't stop everything that you want to stop, you can't, prevent everything that needs to be prevented. It's a very human trait in a philosophical sense. I think part of the problem is that we think that we are much more evolved than we actually are. What tends to happen is things are like technology and stuff, they advance far faster than human evolution does. So we still have this constant notion of failure essentially means death, because long ago when humans were roaming around, sleeping in hedges and in caves and killing tigers with sticks and rocks and what have you, it was a case of you succeed, you get to live another day. You fail and you die. And that is still something that is very, very prevalent within our species. It's something that is, like I said, built into our biology. And therefore, the fear of failure in any regard is going to weigh heavily on an individual. And you can actually see this reflected in real life, because some people, they like to get all of their work completed by a certain time. They like to challenge themselves to get something done, like even like in the smallest things, like a guy, for example. I mean, this is something that's a bit more prevalent in men, but you will find that a guy will like to test himself physically. And this is a great reflection on that Sentinel role, because you're trying to prevent as much as you can, and there's always going to be that fear of failure because you can't actually physically do it. It's not possible to protect everyone all the time. So before I get a bit too carried away, basically the problem the Sentinel has is every enemy that gets through his line of defense, every person that dies because the Sentinel couldn't stop them, every wound that a party member has, is going to be felt. It's going to weigh heavily on his conscience or her conscience. What's going to be really kind of detrimental is that it's not so much their own personal pain, but it's the pain of the people around them. You can't look at your party every day and see the wounds that they've had, the scars that they bear, and you're thinking to yourself, if I just could have interposed myself between them and that monster, that scar wouldn't exist. You start to get into this concept of, I need to be better, I need to try harder, I need to improve myself. It's almost like a sense of self-loathing within a character, despising their own weakness. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie Schindler's List, there's a wonderful scene where he's essentially breaking down as he's feeling this terrible remorse for all the people that he couldn't save. And it's just the absolute perfect example that I can give of what it must feel like to be a person who everyone is relying on, and yet you can't achieve the ultimate goal of, saving everyone. Ultimately, at some point in the game, it has to happen. Someone has to fall. A character has to die. But what makes that loss so painful is those wonderful shared memories. The concept of loss hits home far more if you have something to remember. Do you remember that time that Durga said, don't go chasing after shiny objects, but we insisted on going down and trying to gather up that rare jewel, which turned out to be something glittering at the back of the mouth of a giant purple worm, and Durga had to leap in and rescue us? I kind of wish he was here now. Or, do you remember the times when Xandra used to say, if I ever get so drunk and fall over, make sure you find somewhere to prop me up? But she would always drink us under the table, and we thought nothing could ever put her down. These are the experiences that make characters real, and in making characters real, the feeling that you get when they die or when you lose them is a genuine feeling of loss. So it's as much as you put into your character as you get out of it. And that's true for pretty much anything in life. But I think that if you really wholeheartedly want to play the character, then that feeling of loss is also going to be really, really, pronounced when something terrible does happen. But it doesn't always fall with the player characters. The GM really needs to be a part of it as well. If he's going to make it realistic and lively and, an experience for the players, then he needs to provide characters who are lifelike or even bigger than life in some respects. If you have a town and you have a common pub that you like to go into, if you have a specific inn that you prefer to go to because your GM has described the atmosphere in it in a certain way, and then you kind of get to know the people who are working there, the person behind the bar, the people serving your drinks and food, then you start to understand a bit about them and you start to, see them as real people rather than just background dressing. So when a tragedy occurs, say a dragon sweeps over the town demanding tribute, and when they refuse to pay up, it starts to torch the entire village, you start to ask things like, well, where's the barkeep, whatever his name is, or where's the serving wench, who depending on whatever her name was, and you start to care for the people. And so it's a drive then to go off and adventure harder. You've lost something that meant something to you, and you want to go off and maybe revenge. It's a very common thing. It's bittersweet, but it's something that people can identify with, and it's why it's such a well-known and used trope in so many stories that have been told over the years.
Life's falling away from me. It's falling away from...
So with any luck, that kind of answers the question that was posed to me. I think what we all kind of have to understand is that the feelings that we get, these feelings of despair, they're all subjective. It's not something that I can really dictate to you how you should feel or what you should do, but I can give you a framework of why you might feel that way. I mean, you can consistently put yourself in danger if you want, so that you can try and, get that experience of what it is to have that detrimental effect on a person's psychological well-being. But the best way, I think, to do it is to work with your GM. They're going to put a situation where, this is it actually provokes it. It's a catalyst for why your character feels the way that they do. And it's much more organic, and therefore it's much more real, and it has much more worth. So it looks like we've really opened up a big can of worms here, and I'd like to thank my viewer for this comment that they've made in order to provoke this response, because at the end of the day, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to initiate a discussion amongst you guys, and how you can make your role-playing experience that much more enjoyable. And if I can do that, then, I've done my job. So with that, I hope that this is useful to you. And if there are things that you want to clarify, or if there's things you don't understand, or if you don't quite think I've interpreted your question correctly, then by all means, we'll have a discussion about it in the comments. As for the rest of you viewers, your questions, they make great videos. There are bound to be 10, 20, 100, 1,000 people who might have the same question that you do. And if we're all going to share our experiences and what we've learnt over our years of role-playing, everyone gets to benefit. Even I get to benefit, because as I've said before, I've got just as much to learn as everyone else. So get commenting, get liking, get subscribing, hit those notifications, and make sure you stay tuned, because I do read your comments. I do like to have this interaction with people. So I will see you guys soon.